Let's talk about dopamine deficiency disorder, the causes and the cures. This is my favorite topic. I studied this during my doctoral dissertation for 6 years at the University of Miami, and I figured out how to address it. So, what is the dopamine deficiency disorder? A third of Americans actually have it, and that makes them vulnerable to cravings, whether it's food cravings, drug cravings, being overweight, having low motivation to exercise or work on projects. So that leads to low productivity. Also, you have depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders. All those things have the same brain biochemistry. So I also use that to lose 30 pounds. I used my knowledge studying it and applying it to lose 30 pounds and then maintain it after struggling with depression and being overweight and yo-yo dieting all of my life. And I've taught this concept to my hundreds and hundreds of clients that I've seen so far and the students that I've taught over 10 to 15 years between University of Miami, teaching at DeVry University at Miami-Dade College, and the American College of Sports Medicine. So, this dopamine deficiency disorder is the root cause of your yo-yo dieting, your ADHD tendencies, your addictions, obsessive compulsive disorders, negative mood states, and anxiety levels, and just having low energy. It is having a low baseline dopamine activity that is the root cause. Scientifically speaking, it is termed reward deficiency syndrome. I prefer to call it dopamine deficiency disorder because it's so much easier to have my point come across more easily when I was teaching my students and then when I talk to my clients. And I feel that all roads lead to dopamine, as I'm going to explain in a second. So it makes sense to just focus in on dopamine. What are the causes of dopamine deficiency disorder? Like we mentioned, a third of Americans are just born with less dopamine receptors. So around 33% of Americans just genetically have it. I'll explain a little bit more in a second. Also, being exposed to drugs, especially if you've been exposed to things like sugar or addictive foods from a younger age, any drug that you get exposed to eventually leads to those brain changes. So now you have dopamine deficiency disorder. So any kind of drug from heroin to cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, video game addictions, anything you can think of, obsessive compulsive disorders, all those things over time, if you indulge in them, they will lead to brain changes that will lead your brain to have a brain that is characterized as a brain that has dopamine deficiency disorder, also having poor gut health, so unhealthy guts. And we can talk here about in subsequent videos, I'll talk about what is the best way to and fastest way to improve gut health. Also, exposure to environmental toxins, mercury. If you eat a lot of sushi, for example, if you live in an area where you're breathing in air that is polluted for a long period of time, all those kinds of environmental toxins can over time deposit in your fatty tissues, and your brain is mainly made up of fat, and that can lead to changes that are also equivalent to having this addictive personality, if you want, or having a dopamine deficiency disorder. So, dopamine deficiency disorder is characterized by having less D2 receptors, around 30 to 40% less D2 receptors in the brain. What does that mean? D2 receptors are very important for dopamine to do its job. So dopamine is released in your brain, but you don't really feel the effects of dopamine until it connects to its receptor, also known as the D2 receptor. The number of D2 receptors on the cell surface of your brain are what determine your baseline mood, your baseline dopamine levels, your baseline energy levels, your baseline motivation levels. All of those are determined by how many D2 receptors you have in your brain. So if you have dopamine deficiency disorder, some of us are born this way, some of us develop the brain because we indulge in addictions. Maybe we were sugar addicts from a young age, for example. I know I was. So over time, what ends up happening, we now have a brain that has around 30 to 40% less D2 receptors in the brain. We have like almost half of the amount of D2 receptors that we're supposed to have. And so now, even if we're releasing dopamine, it has nothing to bind to because you need dopamine to bind to the D2 receptor. It's like a lock and key situation. And that is when you truly feel the powerful and happy and beneficial effects of having dopamine in your brain. So Dr. Kenneth Bloom, he originated this work, and he termed this gene that codes for having less D2 receptors. He termed it as the reward deficiency disorder, and he was a professor of pharmacology up till 1995 at the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio, and he founded the scientific journal Reward Deficiency Syndrome that only publishes research surrounding this condition. So also Dr. Kenneth Bloom created the GARS test, which is short for Genetic Addiction Risk Score. And what it does, it's a test that you could just take a cheek swab, and he patented the test, and so you just take a cheek swab, and it looks for approximately 11 of the genes. There's a little bit more genes that are associated with addiction or having reward deficiency disorder, but this test looks for those 11 for only around 11 genes and the variations of them. Which type of the gene do you have? Do you have the type that's associated with addiction, or do you have the type that's protective? And those are some of the genes that have been studied that are correlated with addiction. So you can see a lot of genes that code for various brain chemicals are associated with addiction. So the GABA receptor, opioid receptor, you see here the dopamine D2 receptor has the most amount of studies published on it and its association with addiction. Dopamine deficiency disorder affects more than just dopamine receptors. So, dopamine deficiency disorder is basically when you have a low baseline dopamine level. So, this is affected by more than just having a low number of dopamine receptors. It also affects how serotonin receptors work, how GABA receptors, endorphins, cannabinoids, glutamine, acetylcholine, all of those brain chemicals and their receptors are affected with the dopamine deficiency disorder. They're not functioning properly. And that's because if you have a dysfunction in one of those brain chemicals, they will lead to a cascade of events that will eventually affect how dopamine is released. And so all roads lead to dopamine when we're talking about addiction, and also low mood, low energy levels, and all that kind of stuff. So all roads lead to dopamine. So if you have a dysfunction in the way serotonin is working, it's going to affect how dopamine is going to work, and it's going to lead to also a low baseline dopamine level, or in other words, low number of D2 receptors. And so this is the problem here, why addiction recovery programs are failing. So I have spoken with a lot of addiction rehab directors who run the addiction programs, and it's no secret, it is a well-known fact that around 90 to 95% of rehab protocols or programs where you pay over 20K a month, they end up failing. And that's because they're not focused on regenerating dopamine receptor numbers. They're not focused on raising the number of D2 receptors. And if you're not focused on doing that, as a matter of fact, they actively encourage certain behaviors that would push the client or the patient away from facilitating D2 receptor regeneration. And so if you're not doing what I'm about to share with you in a second, it can take, and you only stopped doing the drug. So your only main form of treating your addiction is just stop doing the drug. It'll take up to 2 years for your brain chemistry to go back to normal following sobriety from drugs. And so imagine going through life for 2 years straight, constantly craving, constantly in withdrawals, constantly feeling like there's something missing, and you just wish you could have that drug, whether it's an alcohol or whether it's a cigarette or whatever your main drug of choice is. This is also why Diets fail. 95% of diets fail because when people go on diets, they don't realize what they're actually doing is they're trying to quit drugs because food is that addictive. Certain foods are that addictive. And so when you're not prepared for what a diet means and you're only counting calories and creating a caloric deficit, but you're not focused on the addiction aspect of it, this is why 95% of people end up having cravings and they binge or they just go back to their previous eating habits. And that's because they're not treating their being overweight or obese, they're not treating it as a symptom of food addiction. It's not just about dieting, it's about the brain rehab protocol that you need to go through to raise your baseline dopamine levels. So what is the solution? You want to regenerate your D2 receptors. You want to raise your baseline dopamine level. I spent 6 years working on this problem as the topic of my doctoral dissertation at the University of Miami, and also applying things on myself, on my clients, and sharing this knowledge with my students. And over a period of time, I developed a protocol, a specific brain rehab protocol that relies on a specific type of exercise. Not all exercise is the same in the way that it modulates and regenerates your D2 receptors. And so I now, what I do with my clients and what I share with you is two or two or three, depending on the case. Not everybody needs the third aspect, but definitely two aspects are really important for this brain rehab protocol to work. The exercise component, if you can exercise, but I do have clients that simply cannot, they have joint problems. And so then the visualizations, and I created two very specific types of visualizations called energy visualizations and training visualizations. I'm not going to go into detail as to the pros and cons and what's the powerful benefit of each, or we'll talk about this maybe in a different video, or you can just get them from my guides. I'll tell you where to get them later. But they're here actually. It's called the Brain Bundle. It's a collection of 3 guides. Each one of those guides will have one aspect of this 3-tiered brain rehab protocol, and you can get it on drzaldivar.com/shop. So this is what it looks like once you go to drzaldivar.com/shop. You will see that. You have Dopamine Brain is the first guide. This guide it outlines the specific type of exercise. And that is the way in which you would want to work out to increase D2 receptor numbers. Monster Mindset is the second guide. In the Monster Mindset guide, there's a huge section specifically on visualization, and that's where I introduced those types of visualizations that I came up with, and I kind of finessed them so that they would work specifically for increasing D2 receptor numbers. And then finally, the supplements that also help with dopamine regulation is the third guide. And if you prefer more one-on-one, more hands-on approach, so one-on-one coaching, I do have that on drzaldivar.com/coaching. And since we're in the holidays, Cyber Monday is today, so I still have a 50% off one-on-one coaching, but it's going to expire in like one day, maybe sooner if the spots get filled up. I'm not 100% sure how much I can take on this month, but if you go to my website and you still see the Black Friday, it says Black Friday actually on the website, then that means you still have a spot available. So this one-on-one coaching sale, it goes under a premium package, maximum support. It's a 12-week program where I see you for a whole hour every single week for 3 months. So for 12 weeks straight, we do Zoom calls. I give you a lot of my clients struggle with weight gain and food addiction specifically. But I do work with clients who don't have those kinds of goals. So addiction is a big part of my work as well, as you can see from my content. So but if your goal is something to do with weight regulation, and we do meal plans, although I would want to add that even if you don't have weight goals, meal planning is very, very powerful in regulating your baseline dopamine level. I'm just going to say that because we don't want to be removing one addiction and substituting it with different kinds of foods that are also drugs. That's not going to regenerate our D2 receptor numbers, right? So we do Zoom calls, we do a personalized meal plan, supplement plan, exercise plan, and I customize them as we go. There's a lot of customization that sometimes needs to happen, especially in weight loss clients, so that they don't plateau. If you have labs, we review them. I'm big on mindset coaching, so that's very important to me to include. Accountability is also a huge part of the coaching. And the thing that I really wanted to include with my coaching is the unlimited email support throughout the month. So at any point in time, you shoot me an email, and there's a lot of little things, that you might have questions about. And instead of waiting until you see me a whole week later, the unlimited email support, I believe, is one of the biggest reasons why my clients find success. You can find the testimonials, by the way, if you go to drzaldivar.com. The first page has the testimonials on it. Yeah. And also on the topic of weight loss, check out my YouTube video that I posted on DeVry fat fasting. This is a tool that can put you into ketosis really fast and help you kick start weight loss if we're talking about food addiction here. And if one of your goals is weight loss, then a DeVry fat fast is something that also I came up with, and I have found a lot of benefit with it with my clients, and it is better than there's a trend going around in the low carb community called the sardines fast, and I just found that the DeVry fat fasting is more powerful because it puts you into a deeper state of ketosis. So now your brain is running on ketones, you're feeling better, and it's reversing insulin resistance really quickly. So check that video out. I will make sure I will link it at the end of this YouTube video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed those kinds of topics, please let me know. And if you have suggestions for future topics, also let me know. I take all those things into consideration, so I make sure I can deliver content that most of you find valuable. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.